The theme of tools. I'm going to welcome Hamish back to the front of the room. I'm not going to chew up any of his time with introduction because I know you all know Hamish well, even if you only met him in this particular round. He's been up the front plenty of times. Hamish is going to now talk with us about some development work around a REM finder tool. Thank you, Hamish.
Thanks for the introduction, Richard. I'm pretty sure what he was saying there was that I was a tool. Anyway, and I'm a little bit nervous coming up here this time because after Luke's performance, I'm not sure I can maintain that level of enthusiasm for as long as Luke did. Very impressive. I'm thinking I might have to throw in a free set of steak knives with each of these other tools to get people interested. So I'd better get down to business, I guess. I just wanted to quickly run through, just to close off the formal sort of proceedings for the day, before we get on to the forum at the end. A few projects that we're looking at working on over the next 12 months or so, that hopefully we'll be seeing some activity on. These are projects that Sheep Genetics has been talking about trying to get up and running for some time in some cases. So we'll be working on these largely in collaboration with the Sheep CRC, New South DPI and some other service providers and stakeholders. And there's also another one I'll very quickly cover off on that is a Sheep CRC project that they took to their conference last week. So firstly, to get started, ramping up genetic gain. This is something that we have been talking about for a while, except now it's got a name, and we're bringing together a team of other people to help with the development and getting it rolled out to industry. So what we're talking about here is better ways of over the last couple of years, Tom and Luke have been going around doing a series of on-property visits and starting to try and develop specific reports to go back to breeders to identify, what is it that is constraining rate of genetic progress in individual flocks. So it's taking that to the next level, further developing that. So we've got a series of on-farm reports to take out to people, identifying, what are the barriers to genetic gain and trying to put some benchmarks around those things so that we can say to people, well, this is where you're operating at, this is the sort of target, for particular components of what's driving rates of genetic progress, and have some clear recommendations that we can start putting around that. We're also looking at rolling that out so that it can be used through the Sheep Genetics dashboard, obviously, but helping set service providers up so that they can use that information to be a lot more involved in the direction of breeding programs and helping people out with a bit of advice there over what the limitations might be. So as I said, reporting out through the dashboard for both breeders to use themselves, but also service providers, and hopefully allowing a lot more of a proactive approach. Rather than waiting for things to blow up at some point in time and we've got to go back and pull out all the detail and say, why isn't this flock's breeding values matching where they think they should be, and then finding out that we've got 35 or 40 management groups in the database for a particular year drop. Trying to be able to identify that stuff early on. We've got the tools to do it better. Service providers and breeders themselves have got the tools to identify these things a lot sooner. So, some of the things that we might be looking at, I think, this is largely going to be broken down into three separate categories. The first one of those is benchmarking. We're already doing benchmarking to some degree in terms of genetic trends. You can compare your genetic trends to the rest of the breed, for example, but what is it that's driving how you compare to the rest of the breed? Is it selection intensity, generation length? How can we look at the rate of gain you're making a little bit more closely? What's happening to your inbreeding coefficients at the same time? So trying to identify, which bits might be of concern for your particular flock. So that's analysing the data that we've already got there better and reporting that back to people in a much more usable form. The next is diagnostics, management group structures. How many management groups, how many animals are in them? Are we making effective use of the data that you're going to so much effort to record? Which traits have been recorded? How good's genetic linkage between flocks? And perhaps things like gene prob as a tool to help identify recessive defects or a black gene or something that's floating around in individual flocks. And then I think the third part of that is an area that we really haven't been particularly involved in until now, and that's the predictive or modelling side of things. If you change these things within your flock, what might that mean for your rate of genetic progress over the next few years? So, things like gen cell or mate cell, I don't obviously need to talk about that in great detail at this point in time. Everyone's already pretty pumped about it, I'm sure. Break-even tools, so, particularly if you start talking about the investment in using DNA testing, where's the return on your investment? If I DNA test in addition to what I'm already doing, what's that going to do to my rate of genetic progress, the accuracy of the traits? If I do DNA testing instead of what I'm already doing, is that a much more cost-effective strategy for my flock? And, there's potentially some other things there that we might be able to look at as well. The project team, I think this is still open to debate a little bit, but at this point in time, there's those of us at Sheep Genetics who will be working on this, who are already involved in extension and so on with clients, working closely with the Sheep CRC, people like Lou Hogan and Stephen Lee, Julius van der Werf. AgBoo staff are going to be very important to us here, particularly with some of those tools that need to be developed for breaking down what's already happening in flocks. So particularly Daniel and Aaron. I probably should have put Andrew Swan there because he's already done a lot of work helping us with looking at selection efficiencies in flocks and that sort of thing. And then some of the state departments, we're hoping to be able to use resources from DPI and DAFWA like Luke and Megan, who are in the audience here, to go and start road testing these things a bit better with people out there in industry coming back to us about what needs to be developed better. And obviously private service providers as well, trying to get them involved in the development of these tools. Now, Ranker-RAM. My good friend and former colleague Luke Stevens come up with the name Ranker-RAM. I went with a really dull option of RamFinder and then found that was already being used by SIL in New Zealand. So Luke has coined the name Ranker-RAM. Could be interpreted a number of ways, I'm guessing. So the first point I'd make about Ranker-RAM is that the name is definitely open for negotiation. But it's an interesting concept. It's a tool that someone who's at DPI has started developing already, that they were doing with the cattle industry in mind. So the prototype is more cattle-based, but it will fit in very neatly with the API that Dave's been talking about and being able to interact with the sheep genetics database. So the idea is it will allow breeders, stud, but perhaps more aimed at commercial breeders, to decide on the balance of emphasis of various traits for animals that might be listed in a RAM sale catalogue or something along those lines. And if they have their own custom index, for example, or we can potentially preload this with standard weightings for standard indexes, or whether it's someone who just wants to play around and see what sort of response they might get in their flock by playing around with different traits. You can choose the emphasis on each of those different traits that you'd like to see which rams out of the sale catalogue it would suggest at the top of the list for that type of breeding objective. And potentially it could be developed into an app you can have on your phone at a sale and say, righto, well, which one of these rams most closely matches what I'm trying to do in this particular situation. I know that's probably not the most user-friendly way of displaying it in this situation, but as I said, it's very much a prototype sort of setting at this point. So, as I said, it's currently a prototype for cattle. So you may not recognise all of these particular trait headings like calving ease direct and calving ease daughters, but it's got all of the traits that might apply, and it's got a sliding bar basically to allow people to slide those backwards and forwards to determine how much emphasis would you be wanting to put on that in this particular situation. What's the impact, either positive or negative, on our breeding operation. So once you've done that, you select how much emphasis on different traits. It gives you the breakdown of what's that look like in percentage terms across the breeding program for those different traits, and also breaks it down into what's the emphasis by trait group. So you can see there with those particular settings that we're in there at the moment, obviously calving and fertility issues were of major concern in this particular situation. Possibly a good friend of mine who pulls 30% of his calves every year perhaps. And you can see what's the breakdown, what impact is that going to have on the trait groups of major interest. So once you've done that, you can then feed into it a particular list of animals. So you could potentially use this for selecting replacement ewes within your flock. You could use this for loading, as I said, a sale catalogue into it and seeing which ones best match what you're looking for. If you miss out on the top few, maybe you can reassess it. But from that list of animals that are provided, it works out what's the selection differential that you would achieve for each of the traits based on that particular list of animals. So, are you paying enough attention to different traits? In this case, what have we got? Mature cow weight is decreasing. Well, I've got a very low selection differential on it. Is that appropriate in that particular case? We've put plenty of pressure on improving our growth rates, but with the unfavourable impact of mature cow weight in terms of maintenance cost of your cow herd, is that favourable? So it just says, what's going to happen in the flock, or in this case herd, if we use those sort of weightings. And then of that team of animals, if we select the animals on that basis, that team of rams, what percentile band would they sit in for each of those traits? So for that group of animals that we're selecting, on average, where would we be sitting relevant to the rest of the breed? So I think that's a tool that we're looking at developing further. As I said, it would interface very well with the Sheep Genetics website, the way it's set up, and could be developed to have a number of different applications. Another one that we are currently looking at, and we'll be continuing to work with Luke in particular on this one, in terms of commercial benchmarking, allowing, developing some tools to allow commercial people who might be buying rams from you guys to track what sort of genetic trends might they be seeing in their flocks. What rams have they bought each year over the last few years? Is there a clear trend for them to be improving index values or growth or whatever? So just developing a way of helping those guys track what... Wow, that wasn't supposed to happen. Track, what genes I've been bringing into the flock, reassessing before sale time every year, what's the average merit of our particular sire battery this year? Do I need to replace some of them because index values have changed, or because there's a whole lot more impressive animals coming on the market this year? So I think one of the other benefits of that would be that it would actually help some of you guys deal a bit more closely with some of your clients. If you were using that sort of tool to help track for them, you know, what direction are you guys going in? Do you remember what you did last year? These are the team of rams that you've got at home, if they're still alive, and, you know, help make a few more strategic direction decisions or whatever that way. And could definitely be built to interact more closely with some other selection decision tools, RAM value calculator, or everyone's favourite ranker RAM. And obviously there'll need to be development around training and communications packages. Why the need for commercial benchmarking? You know, I think it's a matter of what is the breeding objective for your commercial clients. You know, where is my flock currently at? I think that's something that a lot of commercial breeders really do not have a good handle on. I need to know, you know, where I'm wanting to head. People are getting better at developing that, but how am I going to get there? If I don't know where I'm starting from, I don't know whether I need a higher index value. I don't know whether I need, you know, higher growth breeding values, for example. So it's all about trying to help people establish where they're currently at and where to go next. I just put in a few slides of Julius's that he took to the Sheep CRC Conference last week, because it fits very much into this sort of discussion and range of tools that we're talking about. And again, it's aimed at commercial breeders and helping them benchmark things. So, you know, one of the really common questions that when you go to talk to commercial people is, righto, well, how do I know what sort of breeding value I need to buy to, you know, improve my fleece weight or decrease my fibre diameter? How do I relate breeding values to the micron category that I'm operating in at home, and how do I know, you know, whether these rams are going to improve or otherwise the performance in my flock? So it's a way of trying to give people some of those answers. So, you know, people don't know how breeding values necessarily relate to their flock. That's if they, you know, come from outside of the system. They haven't been purchasing rams that are from performance recording flocks. If they are within that system, then the previous discussion applies more. But it's about helping them set targets for purchasing rams. So the aim of it is the CRC are going to be looking at running this as a project to estimate the genetic mean of commercial flocks for various traits. Also use that information to map the flock genetically and, you know, see how it fits into the genetic diversity within those breeds. The expected outcome, obviously, well, some of them aren't quite so obvious, but, you know, you generally think of that second point first, helping people make more conscious decisions about ram choices and how to improve their flock. But, you know, obviously there's some added benefits of raising the awareness amongst other, you know, commercial producers about these sort of technologies and how to use them. You know, I think there's a range of applications and benefits, including, you know, showing the value of you know, genetic merit and genomic tools. So they're looking at running that through as a pilot project, trying to identify what is the best method of establishing benchmarks, what's the logistics of the process, you know, how many animals within a flock would you need to genotype to get a really good estimate of what the average is of that flock. Do you genotype the rams that they've been using over the last few years, or do you genotype a proportion of the ewe-base? And also gauging what's the interest from industry and what would the potential uptake be likely to be. The only one there I didn't really cover, I guess, was whether it should be looked at as a pooled sample or individual animals being genotyped. So they're talking about perhaps sampling 40 progeny from 10 to 20 flocks with the LD or 12K chip. and seeing what they can establish with that. So that finishes me up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hamish. So a couple of new tools under development there, and certainly I think the invitation is widely open for your creativity about what these tools may eventually get named, and I'm sure Hamish and the team will have some highly lucrative prize available for the winning entrant on that one.
Yeah, I think we should run a poll on Ranker-RAM.
Let's have a question from Martin instead.
Thanks, Hamish. Just on that last point you put up, those slides of Julius's, surely that's going a little bit too fast. You should do that work with some of the studs first, with the seed stock producers first. And yesterday there was a slide put up where the suggestion was that I think 20%, we should be testing, genomics testing 20% of our RAM drop or something like that, whereas the real result is less than 2%. So surely, if you work through some of those issues with the seed stock producers first, because I'm sure some of them aren't fully up to speed with where some of our flocks sit, and even maybe encourage more of us to test more sheep so that a fair proportion of the sale catalogues would have those genomics tests, so that would already, that would basically do that job.
I think the two things can certainly run in parallel. Keep working with stud breeders to increase uptake, but this is about how can we give people who are not yet using breeding values an indication of where they might sit. So they do have an identified group of people that they would like to work with on this, who are people who have got breeding values and so on their flock. So they've got an idea of where these flocks would sit. So they're going to test various numbers of animals and so on within those flocks, and to see how good an indication that average genomic value would be of the actual genetic merit of that flock. So it will have to be run with flocks that we actually know a reasonable amount about, so that we can gauge how useful are these results.
Yeah, howdy Joe. Is it correct that about 80% of the terminal sire ram breeders use lamb plan, and less than 20% of merino breeders, ram breeders, use merino select? And if so, why do you think that is, Hamish?
So those figures are not numbers of flocks in lamb plan or merino select. They are more reflective of number of rams sold. So the figure we work on is usually something like 70% of terminal rams sold have got breeding values. The estimates vary, but somewhere between 20 and 30% of merino rams sold have got breeding values. So I think, that's obviously evolved over time for a number of reasons. Terminal size, it's pretty easy to measure what your key traits are, your key profit drivers are. It's easier to do the pedigree side of things and so on. But merinos are certainly the area where we are seeing the most growth at this point in time. The rate of increase in merinos at this point is very promising, and I think it's a really good sign, and it's largely being driven by commercial guys going back saying, look, we want more information to base our decisions on.
Thanks, Hamish. I see we've had one entrant into the Name a Tool competition, so thank you, Penny, for kicking the ball off there.
Excellent.
Another question for Hamish from the floor.
Yep, Bruce Hancock. Hamish, on the commercial benchmarking tool, just linking it back to yesterday where we focused quite heavily on lean meat yield and eating quality and the potential for lean meat yield feedback to be on board later this year. Probably one use I can see is actually for the commercial producer to be able to do a backdating assessment of new traits that come on board with that. Like say, there's lean meat yield trait. Well, he's bought the rams without any information. Got 40 rams in the fleet. Be pretty handy to be able to get that information and see where he sits in the scheme of things.
Yeah, I think I think you're right, Bruce, and you could definitely look at that in the perspective of current traits as well. I've had plenty of people ring me. Dave, you'd better go back to Armidale fairly shortly. I've had people ring me before and say, what sort of fat breeding values should I be telling my clients that they need to buy? And, the answer is, I don't know. What do their kill sheets look like? Are their kill sheets suggesting that they've got a problem with over-fat lambs, or, are they struggling to get enough finish on them at slaughter weights? So I think matching, the performance that they're seeing with the breeding values that they've been using, and then using that to help, make decisions for what direction they should be going in. I think that's a really critical part of it, and certainly could be used for new traits, once we've got that information coming into the system, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions for Hamish at this point? No, none online. So at this stage, I'm not the judge, but I think Penny's definitely in the lead for naming the tool.